Forecasts suggest that China's economic growth for 2022 will come in at slightly more than 3%. That might sound good, but compared to the recent past, where 8% or more was the norm, it's becoming clear that China's economy has hit a rough patch. How rough and for how long? Let's find out from Mary Lovely. She's an economist and senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, who joins us from Washington, D.C., and in Vancouver, British Columbia, Joanna Chu, senior reporter at the Toronto Star and author of China Unbound, A New World Disorder. And Joanna, it's good to have you back on our program. We had you on when your book came out. Mary Lovely, it's great to meet you and appreciate you making time for us. Joanna, to you first. We see that China has delayed the release of its latest economic growth figures. They were supposed to be published as the leadership gathered at the Party Congress to confer a third term on President Xi Jinping. What do you infer from this?
As you know, Steve, I was a journalist in Beijing for 7 years. I was actually last there 5 years ago when Xi Jinping got the mandate to rule for life, which is very likely why he will get a third term this weekend. But as a journalist in Beijing, one of your earliest days, working days of the year, is the start of the Party Congress when they release the GDP figures. You line up at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. to race to be the first media outlet to release those figures. So it's really, really unusual that they have postponed indefinitely the release of these figures. It's pretty unprecedented, and it really shows and really makes it seem that the figures are worse than economists even predicted. You mentioned growth of 3%, which is quite low compared to previous years, previous decades in China. But now with the postponement, economists are wondering if the growth is even lower than that. China's unemployment rate is, getting higher and higher. And I think a lot of people living in China, companies, consumers, are really the confidence in China's economy has really taken a nosedive.
Mary, can you just add to that in as much as I think our viewers and listeners would like to know some of the background that would be contributing to China's economic difficulties at the moment? Help us with that.
Well, in the short term, the two biggest factors are the zero COVID policy, the lockdowns, the fear of lockdowns that have led consumer confidence to really take a nosedive and has slowed consumer spending. So in the second quarter of this year, actually, consumer spending shrunk a little bit. So growth was very low, but it was made up of two other factors. So that's another important factor is, of course, the ongoing property crisis. Chinese households have a lot of their money invested in the property sector. And when the property prices decline, as they has been, that lowers household wealth, lowers consumption, provides another downward pressure on the economy.
Joanna, if I can use a terrible pun here, let's just zero in on the zero COVID policy for a second. Tell us what this actually looks like on the ground, the zero COVID policy.
Yeah, so I haven't lived in China for 5 years, but have been in touch with close friends who live in China, who were living in Shanghai when they had that infamous, really harsh lockdown from April to June. I have friends who lost 10 kilograms because food was so limited during this really quick, sudden lockdown when there were some COVID cases in this, very, very big and cosmopolitan city. And I think there was already rising frustration among people in China about President Xi's zero COVID policy, not being able to travel since the pandemic started, really, really quite lengthy mandatory quarantine, which has really affected global business relations between Chinese and international companies. But I think Shanghai was kind of the last straw. It was very symbolic, this, relatively progressive city and outward-looking city in China just locking down overnight. So it's actually triggered this movement called the Run movement in China, where especially young people feel that they don't have much of a future staying in China. They're really trying to leave their homes. They want to go to places. And I have met people who have left and are now living in Vancouver. So, people actually picking up and leaving China, I think it's a very good indication of how zero COVID has really shaken people's confidence, not just in how China's economy might be able to recover from this, but also just the future. I think there's growing dissatisfaction with the authoritarianism from Beijing's government, the crackdown in all sorts of human rights and areas.
Yeah, Mary, let me follow up with you on the zero COVID policy as well. Do you think Xi Jinping is going to reconsider the advisability of following this zero COVID policy as tightly as he has, given what everybody anticipates to be the negative economic news to come out?
Well, I certainly agree with Joanna that this has been a turning point and an eye opener for a lot of companies and individuals. Xi Jinping has given us no reason to believe that this policy is going to change anytime soon. He's a bit backed into a corner. He has trumpeted China's success in avoiding many COVID deaths. And if he removes zero COVID policy now, it's unclear what will happen. China has many old people. It's been vaccinated with its homegrown vaccines. We don't know how effective they'll be against the Omicron variant. And so he risks widespread suffering and illness. And that's just simply unacceptable to him.
Let me do a follow-up with you, Mary, on the issue of the war in Ukraine and what impact you think that is having on China's economy at the moment.
I think it's had both negative and positive effects. I think in some sense it has eased energy prices. China has begun to import a lot of oil from Russia. It was already getting energy from Russia, but this has lowered the price for them. Some of that has been resold, particularly to India. It has, however, also, I think, strengthened the resolve in the West to see China as an adversary, more so than a competitor. And we've seen that by the recent actions in the United States to extend export controls on semiconductors and semiconductor equipment manufacturing equipment, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Let me do a quote here from President Xi Jinping, and Joanne, I'll get you to pick up on this. In a speech to the Communist Party's Congress in 2017, so we're going back 5 years here, he said, "China will not close its door to the world. We will only become more and more open." Well, okay, he didn't anticipate COVID, in fairness to him, but clearly this hasn't happened. So how detrimental do you see the continued isolationism due to the zero COVID policy?
Mm-hmm. I was just in Taiwan last month to try to see at least closer to the ground what's happening. And people talk about Taiwan because that's where the world's biggest semiconductor microchip foundries are. TSMC is the biggest. And China relies on TSMC. The US relies on TSMC. What's happening now is really interesting because we see kind of a closing up on both sides, China with its zero COVID policies and also the US with the export controls. The US has really, those export controls are very stringent, really targeting and trying to strangle China's ability to innovate in AI and high tech. Which are, the future technologies that will transform China's cities. That's what they're hoping. They want smart cities. They want smart cars everywhere. So on both sides, from the U.S. and also China's policies, what we're seeing, I fear, is kind of a bifurcating of the world. So countries like Canada will have to choose. Are you going to want to keep working with China, or do you want to be able to keep doing business with the U.S., especially in certain fields that are considered sensitive? Like technology. So a lot of countries are trying to diversify, at least to mediate some of the risk, to move some of its manufacturing away from China, maybe not entirely, but at least spreading it around Vietnam, Indonesia, Taiwan. So actually, people are pushing for Canada to kind of catch up with like-minded countries to release some sort of strategy on how it will mitigate this really complex factors, including U.S.-China competition, including ongoing zero COVID. And Foreign Minister Jolie has said that after this week's Party Congress, they will release Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy, which has been long delayed. So hopefully we will see what Canada's plan is exactly to deal with this really difficult terrain.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to pick up on the Canada angle a little bit more in a second, but I first want to hear from Mary on your views, Mary, as it relates to increasing isolationism in China and the implications on their economy thereof.
Well, we have to remember that China did liberalize its financial services sector. So there was a lot of inflow of U.S. investment into this sector recently. In the last couple of years, it's also received record amounts of inward foreign direct investment. So what Joanna is talking about and I'm talking about are things that are happening right now. We don't know what the extent of this bifurcation will be. Many of us have been talking about worries about splitting the ecosystem that supports innovation. particularly semiconductors. And we're seeing that happen right now in real time. Part of the US export controls demand that any US passport holders, US citizens, cannot work for certain companies in China that make semiconductors or semiconductor manufacturing equipment. So there are very high level people inside China who have these passports, are Chinese, and are going to have to decide. So this is really the beginning of a splitting of the ecosystem, a dividing up of the talent. And we don't know how this will affect the industry moving forward. Will the industry be as innovative and vibrant if it's two instead of one? Because many of these technologies rely on really a global pool of talent and a global pool of knowledge to make the progress that we have made so far.
Joanna, let's pursue that Canadian angle a little more now, and I'll start with the fact that I think I saw the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister of the country, Chrystia Freeland, say the other day that Canada really needs to start looking towards creating more links, both economically, socially, culturally, in business, of course, with other like-minded nations, and perhaps, I don't know how strongly she was pushing this idea, but distancing themselves from countries that were increasingly bellicose on the world stage. Certainly she thought of Russia first, but China was likely in there as well. So, okay, this increasingly isolationist China because of the COVID policies, the presumably adverse economic numbers that are still to come out. How do you see all that affecting Canada?
I think, this is obvious for all of your viewers, but also has to be said that I think Canada has learned a lesson from the whole Meng Wanzhou and Two Michaels crisis, that, detaining Meng on the behest of U.S. authorities, as, Canada had the obligation to do so, led to the hostage taking of Canadians. And that has been at the forefront of Canada's foreign relations with China for, much of the last few years, trying to secure the release and the safety of these Canadian men that were caught up. In addition to the hostage taking, China also increasingly uses, my book looks at its economic coercion measures around the world, using tariffs, blocking imports of certain goods from countries that it has conflict with. Australia is kind of a major, there's a major dynamic there with many Australian goods blocked. So I think Canada sees what's happened to ourselves and also sees what the pattern of what China's doing around the world, kind of resorting to more of these aggressive tactics to try to get what it wants. So it makes sense. A lot of experts say it makes sense for Canada and other countries to try to at least diversify its global markets and investments. It just seems wise because China has been dangling, holding hostage both citizens of the world and also different economies and industries of the world. Farmers are often people who suffer when things like canola or pork, or get slapped with tariffs. But that said, talking about global talent pool, there is some silver lining here in that there are still many, many Chinese scientists, scholars who are able to study overseas, to work overseas. There aren't regulations and rules that bar most of them from contributing to global innovations. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind, that as we deal with increasingly aggressive Beijing, we're not isolated from China in that the people are different from the Chinese government. And they are keen, like I said, to leave the country, to build their lives elsewhere. And we can still benefit from their talent. Just the talent pool in China is huge. So I would also, caution that people shouldn't give up on all people of China, and actually to welcome them coming and working in our universities, trying to contribute to fields like medicine and science.
No, that's a great distinction to make. A very good point. Mary, let's get the American angle into this now. There have been a lot of predictions, recent predictions, suggesting that China, because of its massive growth rates over the past many years, would overtake the United States in the not-too-distant future as the world's biggest economy. Do you think that project is on hold for now?
I think it's delayed. We are seeing we're going to see slower growth in China this year. Even next year, the predictions are a little over 4%. And those are just predictions. If zero COVID policy continues into next year, it's going to be hard even to reach those numbers. So there's a lot of ifs up in the air, and it depends on how we look at the economy. If we look at it in dollar terms, that's a little more difficult because the RMB has depreciated against the dollar. If we look at it in sort of purchasing power parity terms, China will eventually, I think, overtake the United States, but it's going to be at a much slower rate than was previously predicted.
Let's also now just understand what slower growth rates in China will mean in terms of Xi Jinping's mission for the country and his hopes for what the country might have become if the 8 and 9% growth rates were able to continue. Joanna, a slowing Chinese economy means what has to be put on hold in terms of China Inc. as a project?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's what we see now is that we perhaps are seeing bigger human rights crackdowns. The pattern I witnessed firsthand living in China is as the Chinese leadership feels like its grip on power is, loosening, that they crack down harder on any type of criticism, even if it's constructive criticism from people like lawyers or political scientists in China who are trying to advocate for better checks and balances to fight issues like corruption in government. These people, many of them are in jail in Hong Kong. Many previous lawmakers are in jail under the national security law. So in the short term, perhaps long term, you will see a insecure leadership cracking down harder on its people, also its critics around the world. We saw in Manchester in the UK, some, Hong Kong diaspora immigrant protesters were outside the Chinese consulate, and police authorities there said one of them was dragged in and beaten up on consulate grounds and had to be rescued by UK police. So, these scenes are alarming, and unfortunately, I think I see them ramping up. I see foreign journalists, foreign researchers continue the trend of being kicked out of China in a quite aggressive terms. So we are losing our ability to really understand firsthand what's going on in the country when this kind of insecure state doesn't want people to see. So they're pushing out journalists, researchers. So all in all, I think this is not going to be, this high insecurity isn't good for China's society. It's not good for, like we said, consumer and business confidence in investing in China, in making large purchases and traveling when travel is perhaps in the future going to be more accessible. So
let me just jump in,
really
Joanna, because I'm running out of time and I want to make sure I get Mary on this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mary, tell us, okay, so political instability, social instability, we're hearing from Joanna. What do you see in the future as a result of the slowing growth rates in the country?
Well, just looking at Xi Jinping's economic agenda, with slower growth, he's going to have trouble reaching some of the key objectives of his next 5 years, one of which is common prosperity. He's stressed employment in his recent work report to the Party Congress. It's hard to get employment growth when productivity is low, when the economy isn't able to grow quickly because of a variety of factors, such as misallocation of capital, privileging state enterprises over private sector businesses. So he's going to have trouble delivering on the key economic goals that he's set. And that certainly interacts with the kind of political repression that Joanne is talking about, because to maintain stability, they'll have to rely more on these other tools than on growth. So it's a dynamic that we'll certainly want to watch moving forward.
And what do you think Xi Jinping can do to stem the tide of what you've just forecast?
I think there's a lot of reforms that have been out there that they know very well, making sure that private sector businesses have the capital that they need. For example, the entry of new businesses is really slowed. That means they're not getting the capital they need to grow. Venture capital money into the country has really slowed. Things like providing a better social safety net for people who will then allow them to reduce their saving, consume more, move to more consumption-led growth. So there's a whole bunch of policies that are out there. Unfortunately, they would require more decentralization, less control from the center, and therefore it seems unlikely that Xi Jinping will adopt these needed reforms.
Joanna, last minute to you on that. Can you imagine the loosening from the center to allow these reforms to happen?
The macro reforms, I'm not sure, but I think on zero COVID, which is a major factor for the economy slowdown, there are ways I think the CCP can gradually adjust its policies to not, overnight, because I think it is hospitals would be overwhelmed. They would see a lot of COVID deaths. But I think what's necessary, perhaps, to, reduce this complete just shutdown of consumer confidence is to at least gradually reduce some of the COVID measures.
Gotcha. Great summary, you two. Thank you very much. Joanna Chu from the Toronto Star, Mary Lovely from the Peterson Institute. We thank you for joining us from Vancouver and Washington, respectively.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.